Good morning, y'all. We are back with another edition of DNVR Rams Live. As always, I am your host, Justin Michael. Hope everybody is having a great Friday morning out there. Appreciate everybody rocking with us live on YouTube. If you wouldn't mind giving us a thumbs up, saying good morning in the Toyota chat, that would be awesome. We've got a fun show planned for you. It's going to be a really big weekend, obviously, for CSU. Big showdown with Utah State, an opportunity to jump up to second in the Mountain West. It could get pretty weird here down the stretch. We talked about it a little bit yesterday. I kind of stumbled through some of the tiebreaker scenarios. I'll go through it hopefully a little bit more articulately today. I'm so stoked, man. This is my favorite time of year. I love college basketball. I love Mountain West basketball in particular. And then we've got the conference tournaments and the NCAA tournament. There's games in Denver. I'm excited for that. So there's a lot of fun stuff happening. A big Avs game tonight as well. For those that also are hockey fans, I'll be there. We actually have a suite takeover. So some DNVR diehards will be hanging out with, Eric Lacroix and our guy Rudo, which is really cool. I'll probably pop in at some point, say hello. If you're at the Avs game tonight, would love to say hi. As Jacob says here, and we'll get to this, like I said, the CSU-Utah State game, Niko about to remind everyone why he's in the Player of the Year conversation tomorrow. It was fun to hear on the Air Force broadcast, the commentator just outright say, I think it was Justin Adams, say Niko should be the Player of the Year. Obviously, there's been a lot of love for Donovan Dent, and rightfully so. But I think when you look at what Niko has done for the Rams this year, and the way that he's been able to elevate a squad that was picked 7th, did not have a ton of preseason expectations after losing, the greatest point guard in program history. And even on top of that, seeing so many other key pieces go out the door. Joel Scott was a beast last year. I think about how good he was in that Virginia game in Dayton in the NCAA tournament. And, the Rams don't advance without that big time showing. It's a shame they were running on fumes, by the time they played that Texas game, because I think if they had even a day more rest, they beat that very average Texas team. Their legs were just dead, but we'll see here. Maybe the Rams can find a way to play their way into the tournament once again. We'll get into all that here in just a couple minutes. I did want to open with an update on some of the Mountain West and Pac-12 drama. We talked about a lot of that yesterday, so I'm going to try not to get too repetitive just in terms of laying out kind of what the next steps are going to look like. If you missed it, we did kind of just get into how, a settlement always seemed very likely. There's an incentive on both sides to get a deal done. It was highly unlikely that the Mountain West was ever going to get the $150 million that they wanted to get. It's also very highly unlikely that the departing schools get away scot-free. I will say, though, now that we've gotten some clarification here, originally it was reported by Ross Dellenger of Yahoo Sports that mediation had already begun between the Mountain West and Pac-12 conferences. It seems that wasn't 100% correct, but we are getting closer to that process. The commissioner, Gloria Nevarez, issued a statement to Ross Dellenger basically saying that the Mountain West has reached out to the Pac-12. They're open to mediation. So it's the Mountain West reaching out to the Pac-12, but that process has not technically begun yet. Here's the quote that Gloria gave to Ross Dellenger of Yahoo Sports. As referenced in a recent court filing, the Mountain West Conference has agreed to explore the potential for a global resolution of the issues raised in lawsuits brought against the conference by Colorado State University, Boise State University, and Utah State University, as well as the Pac-12 Conference. The goal is to resolve the parties' disputes through terms mutually agreed to by the parties. While the conference remains confident in its legal positions, the ongoing litigation matters are a distraction from our main priorities, serving our member institutions and our student athletes. A lot to get into there. I've tried to make it abundantly clear that I don't consider myself a know-it-all. Certainly not a lawyer. Wasn't anywhere near smart enough to come anywhere close to being a lawyer. I'm not a legal expert. I'm not going to be able to tell you guys with any certainty where this is going. I've tried to listen to people smarter than me. I've tried to read as much information. I've tried to reach out to people that do work in in the field and just kind of pick their brains. All along, everybody has basically indicated that a settlement was essentially imminent. What's interesting to me about this is it's the Mountain West that is looking to expedite the process, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, but admittedly, my gut reaction when I saw that it was the Mountain West initiating the settlement talks is they're maybe not 100% sure in their position. If you feel confidently like you've got this in the bag, you're going to win in court, even if it's going to drag out with $150 million on the line, I would think you would come out pretty intense and essentially just be like, we're not settling for $1 less. Now, maybe it's just because they know it could drag on years and years and years and they just want to get it out of the way. That's fair, I suppose, but it just is a little bit interesting to see how this has all played out, especially because there have been so many snarky comments, typically from, supporters of like New Mexico and Wyoming. And honestly, though, even a lot of national college football writers about how, these Pac-12 teams, they signed a contract. There's no way they're going to be able to get out of this. I felt like that was always a little bit, I don't know, ignorant, I guess would be the way to look at it. When you look at the history of how these things have gone between various conferences, it almost always comes to some type of resolution process. Usually you're able to negotiate because at the end of the day, none of these schools want to spend months and months in court. They don't want to spend all this money fighting it when they could just get a sum and move on with their lives. But it has been pretty interesting to me how this has played out. And now what's going to be, I think, very interesting to see down the line is what type of middle ground are they able to find? What does that settlement ultimately look like? But also, how confident are the Pac-12 lawyers? Like, they obviously felt like they had a pretty good chance to get these poaching penalties thrown out. That's a big point of contention, that $55 million on top of the exit fees. Like, if you're able to get those thrown out altogether, you are in a really good spot. Again, that feels unlikely to me, but what does the Pac-12 end up paying the Mountain West in the end? Is it $100 million? Is it $50 million? If it's $50 million when it could have been 150, I think you're going to be more or less feeling pretty good about the situation. Ultimately, I believe in the vision here. I think it was the right move for the departing schools, given the circumstances available. I will say, you could have talked me into a merger being fun. There was a time where I thought maybe that would be the outcome. Maybe Oregon State and Washington State would just join up with the Mountain West. Maybe they rebrand as the Pac-12 at that point. For various reasons, it became pretty clear that was never really in the cards. It just wasn't what they wanted. I had heard, behind the scenes that those schools wanted to rebuild. That obviously has happened. It seems like we're getting pretty close to some type of resolution with all this, and we're going to finally find out some answers. Both the San Diego State and Washington State athletic directors have been gone on record of late and said that media deal is imminent, that it should come out in March, and that there should be expansion news shortly after. I am curious if like this first move from an expansion standpoint is something cheap just to get to that full football conference. Maybe you get Texas State on an SMU-esque type deal. SMU's not taking anything from the ACC for like a decade. I doubt they would do that, but maybe you give them a quarter of a share or something like that, half a share, and they're willing to come. At that point, it would make a lot of sense to me. I get that these decisions are made almost exclusively for TV business reasons, and it pretty much just comes down to dollar signs. I'll also say, like, I understand the perceived value of getting into Texas, and if a school like Texas State is able to continue the ascension that they're on, maybe down the line it ends up being a nice value play. Being completely transparent with you, if they don't land Memphis, I feel like it's all going to feel pretty underwhelming. Just Texas State especially would be a bummer. I don't think they'll only add one more. I think they'll add at least 2, if not 3 more schools at some point here over, the next couple months, even the next year or so. You don't necessarily have to make all the moves, all at once. But I don't know, especially because it's like this time of year and I'm fully locked into college basketball at the moment. The Mountain West is really fun on the college basketball side, and I'm gonna miss some of the matchups like New Mexico, and I would rather have the Pit and UNM hoops than just about any of the remaining realistic football targets. Memphis aside, again, I think Memphis is the one where if you land them, man, definitively, what a success this would feel like. You're very clearly the best of the rest at that point. You're able to fully handicap the AAC, which has already been, knocked down a couple of times because of realignment. And the Mountain West at that point really wouldn't even come close. I don't think it's that big of a debate anyways, as is like very clearly the side to be on is the Pac-12, but there's a lot of moving parts here, and depending on how some of these things ultimately play out, it's going to dictate, whether this is considered a win on a national level or not. I think even if the Pac-12 falls short of what we all hope for with the media rights process, it will be a decision that I can support because these schools are just trying to keep pace in a crazy changing landscape. And frankly, like while I'll miss some of these other schools, even while I just gave New Mexico some love, there's a reason that some of these other schools were not prioritized in the process. Like I understand the logic of all of it. And I think that if they are going to have any opportunity of remaining relevant, like you are going to have to bet on yourself. You are going to have to gamble a little bit. And this is a gamble. I just think that it's a gamble worth taking. I will say from everything that we've heard, and even in the grant of rights that the Mountain West schools signed here through 2032, the schools that are going to be staying put, they anticipate that they're going to basically be able to maintain the current media rights deal that they have, which is, roughly $3.5–4 million a school. My gut response would be how, but if they do that, I would think that would be good for the Pac-12, because if those schools are worth that, I guess I just struggle to see how the Pac-12 schools would not be worth like 12 million. I mean, I've kind of set 10 million as the baseline for this to feel like a big win, but I again, like if you're able to get 4 million for Northern Illinois and UTEP and Nevada and San Jose State, I just have a hard time seeing how you couldn't get 11 or 12, especially if you're able to like lean into a creative streaming deal or something like that. I think you hope for somewhere in the middle, some streaming, and obviously to be available on TV. A great option, I think, would be if you could come up with a deal with TNT, because then you're able to stream the games on Max, but you're also able to watch on standard cable. I just, based on, some of those numbers put out by John Wilner, which talked about viewership, if you look at the 8 games last year where data is available, between games where it's future Pac-12 schools, so Washington State versus Boise State, Oregon State versus CSU, or Mountain West matchup, San Jose State versus New Mexico, Wyoming, versus UNLV, etc. The Mountain West games, they averaged about 535,000 viewers. They collected 22.5 million total. The Pac-12 generated 33 million viewers, an average of 720,000. That's pretty substantial. Some of the Mountain West matchups, Air Force Nevada, that drew 98,000. Nevada San Jose State only drew 28,000 viewers. Whereas, like Boise State, Washington State, that's 535,000 viewers. CSU, Oregon State, 568,000. Oregon State, Boise actually drew 1.7 million, which is awesome. I think there's value and there's interest in these programs, and I think these are the ones we want to be associated with. But it sure would be nice to get some reassurance and reassurance. Am I saying it right? Reassurance. Good God. And get a media deal here so that we're ultimately able to kind of move forward, and then we can start looking at the next stuff and floating all of those hypotheticals. I'll give a couple more thoughts on this, and we're going to jump into CSU-Utah State. We do need to take a quick break, though. It appears we got to pay the bills, shout out a couple of our partners. Toyota has always been a part, or trucks have always been a part of Toyota's DNA for generations. Toyota's built durable legends destined for greatness and perfect for Colorado. Whether you're conquering off-road trails or hauling the weight of the world, there's a Toyota that's just right for you. Check out the Tacoma or the Land Cruiser. Those are awesome. They've got 17 models with available all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive like the Epic 4Runner. They also have more low and zero-emission vehicles combined than any other automaker, giving customers numerous choices to reduce their carbon footprint. They've got 16 hybrids that you can choose from. And again, check out those SUVs like the RAV4 and Grand Highlander, where you can get all the benefits, of living in Colorado, being able to go out, travel in the mountains, all that fun stuff, but not be inconvenienced when you're driving around the city either. Toyota is a proud partner of CSU Athletics and the official vehicle of DNVR. Toyota, let's go places. We also want to shout out Shady Rays. Shady Rays has been a longtime partner of ours. And if you're cruising around in your new Toyota, you want to look cool while you do so. You can do so while you're rocking your Shady Rays. They're an independent sunglasses company, but they make a product that is world-class. Premium polarized shades, great frames, and you don't have to break the bank. They did 5 stars by over 300,000 people. They've got all kinds of options to choose from, and they are hooking you up. I wear my Shady Rays all the time. Wear them in the pool. I wear them while I'm walking the dog, doing yard work. They're perfect. And what's great is with the lost and broken replacement policy, I know that, let's say, my dog Indy actually chews them up. Boom, they're going to replace them for me. No questions asked. Exclusively for our listeners, Shady Rays is giving out the best deal of the season. Just go to shadyrays.com. Use that code DNVR for 35% off polarized sunglasses. Try for yourself. The shades rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. All right, I'm going to put a bow on some of the conference realignment talk. I will say, and again, this is a gamble, but I think it's a gamble worth taking no matter what happens here. I will be supportive. Like if for whatever reason the media deal doesn't come out to what we anticipate, and let's say it's like 8.5, 9 million, would be more than they were making. So it's still a step up. But I would understand why they took this risk, why it could happen. Connor in the Toyota chat says, I hope we're requiring y'all to get a baseball team. Unfortunately, we are not getting baseball anytime soon. That was one of the things I asked CSU's athletic director about. Because of Title IX, there's just a lot of reasons it's not going to happen. They can't afford it. Maybe down the line. I would love to see college baseball. We were actually talking about this in the DNVR Discord with some members. Like, baseball is a big part of my life, where it always has been traditionally. And I've never really been into college baseball because CSU and CU don't have a team. Wyoming doesn't have a team. It just really hasn't been a big part of my life. But I think I would be a diehard. I think I'd be super into it if they ever did introduce it. Taylor wants to know, do you think Moby will get a sponsor name moving into the Pac-12? I think that's highly likely. Any way that you can increase your revenue, it makes a lot of sense, especially if you want to make some renovations, which I know is part of the future plans there. They want to take this basketball thing to the next level. Basketball in the Pac-12 is obviously going to be epic. It's going to be a blast. Connor in the Toyota chat says, you can be an honorary Beef fan since we're the only Pac-12 team right now. Yeah, we'll collectively all root for Oregon State. We certainly are all in this together. Like, I'll be pulling for Washington State and Oregon State to have success on the basketball side. Gonzaga, obviously, I'm really excited about that relationship in the future. As far as a merger goes, you're still seeing people throw out that, again, it wasn't that realistic from the first place based on everything that I've heard. Now it seems downright implausible, just given the fact that the Mountain West has added UTEP and Northern Illinois and UC Davis and just all these other programs. It's too many mouths to feed that don't add value. Like, if they didn't want to bring along San Jose State and Nevada for the ride, do you think they want to bring along UTEP and Northern Illinois football? Like, I just don't see how that could happen. That goes against everything that the Pac-12 leaders have kind of sold as the vision behind this, like-minded institutions that are all committed at a certain level to athletics, and it just wouldn't make sense to me. That's going to cause some bad feelings. I know whenever I say stuff like this, it really frustrates some of my friends in Wyoming and New Mexico, I've been very honest about how a lot of this is bittersweet to me. I understand the logic behind it, but I've been a Mountain West guy my entire life, so it will be weird. It'll be weird to not play New Mexico twice a year in basketball. It'll be weird for the border war to be a September non-conference game. It's going to be different. Having said that, anybody that tries to frame this as evil CSU, evil Boise State, even evil Oregon State and Washington State for, shredding the Mountain West apart, this is what it has always been. And there's an irony to that because it's quite literally why the Mountain West was formed in the first place. The WAC expanded too much in the 90s. They went from like Hawaii to Oklahoma. They were in all these different time zones, all these schools that nobody had history with, and it was too many mouths to feed. So schools like BYU and Utah and CSU and Wyoming, they met at, back then DIA, and they formed the Mountain West Conference. They ultimately decided San Diego State, New Mexico, and UNLV would come along as well. But this is what it was. And the funny thing is I've seen so many people in Albuquerque and Laramie especially be like, man, these selfish schools, they screwed all of us over. And to an extent, maybe there is some of that. But this is what it has always been. And if you're saying otherwise, you're full of shit. And I can point to the history of it, man. If you really want to go back, Wyoming, Utah, New Mexico, BYU, CSU, we were all in the Skyline Conference between, the 30s and the 50s. And eventually, all those schools, they went to the WAC in 62. You know who didn't get an invite? CSU. CSU had to be independent for 5 years. It was a rough stretch. They ultimately do get an invite and join in 68, and then they're in that league for 30 years. But this is just how it's always been. Schools always shuffle. They always do what they feel is in their best interests. And while there is a lot of shared collective history between some of these schools, this is nothing unique. And I hate to break it to anybody that tries to paint this as like CSU and Boise as, being in the wrong here. It's just nothing new. This is what it has always been. So that's my thoughts on all of this. We've got some more comments coming in the Toyota chat's awesome to see how active we're rolling right now. Henry says, crazy wish list, CSU D1 hockey team, upgrade Moby and make it a dual sport to post hockey games in Moby. That'd be electric with the in-state games against DU. Yeah, man, like I'm a big DU hockey guy. My girlfriend is a DU alum. I've been, following the Pios my entire life. Kind of I've always viewed them as the state's hockey team, given, CSU, CU. They don't have a team. Air Force does, technically, I suppose. But as I said, they aren't adding any sports anytime soon. Even with the move to the Pac-12, Amy Parsons and John Weber, when they came on my show shortly after this news was announced, they made that very clear. I asked them directly any opportunity to add sports with this move, and it's just not in the plans anytime soon. That said, I do anticipate renovations to Moby in the near future. Connor says he'd rather merge with the AAC at this point than the Mountain West. You'd probably get more money from it just because you'd have East Coast access in Texas. From a TV metric standpoint, that would probably make more sense. Merging with either of those leagues doesn't make sense to me, though. The AAC has already been gutted for all its best parts by the Big 12. Outside of Memphis, like there just really isn't anybody that excites me all that much. You could talk me into Tulane or UTSA if you want to bring two of them together, but really, like, go get Memphis, handicap the AAC once and for all, and then we'll see what else they do, whether it's a Texas State or UConn as a full member. Seems unlikely, but it would be pretty cool. I do wonder if they'll explore more basketball only members. St. Mary's, I believe they have a pretty good baseball program. They could be in the mix if you're able to get them as a half member or something like that. I would not support giving them a full share like you did with Gonzaga. I think there's just levels to this. But it's going to be a huge month. And if the recent reports are true regarding a media deal coming out this next month and then expansion shortly after, we really should get the ball rolling here. But one of the big steps is ultimately going to be resolving these fees and figuring out ultimately how much the Pac-12 is going to have to pay the Mountain West and how much money they are going to have to work with to expand the league. And the last thing I will say is that a lot of the reports from people like Canzano and Wilner and even some of the other national guys have stated that out of all the remaining schools out there, none of them really juice the TV numbers that much for the Pac-12 to drastically, increase your payday, which might make them a little bit hesitant to shell out some money for a program like Memphis. Even if they don't drastically raise the dollars you're bringing in, though, I think there's an argument that it would be pretty short-term thinking to not add them. I just think at that point, between both football and basketball, you're giving yourself a competitive program. You assure that there are no other leagues outside of, the P4 that are even remotely within your range. And I am a big college basketball guy, so I'm probably really drumming that element harder than a lot of people would. But to me, it seems like basketball is a pretty big focal point for what the Pac-12 is building here, and I think they can kind of be like the Big East contemporary on the western half of the country. So it's going to be a really interesting month. I think there's a pretty good chance some of this drops during the conference tournament weeks. It would make a lot of sense. You've got a lot of buzz. That's kind of how this has worked in the past. So I'm really looking forward to it these next couple of weeks here. We're going to get into CSU-Utah State. I am going to give out some keys for the Rams against the Aggies, a really important matchup for both of these teams, who at the moment do not favor, or they do not fare quite as favorably as San Diego State and Boise State do when it comes to some of the tiebreakers against the top teams in the league. This is a game that, if you want to finish top three, really both of these teams are going to need to win. So it should be a fun one. I'm certainly looking forward to being at Moby. RG is going to be there, so we're going to get a Ryan Green spotlight, which is always epic. Before we get into that Utah State preview, I do want to shout out a couple of other partners. I'm actually rocking. It's so faded, you probably can't read it anymore. I got a Breckenridge Brewery hoodie on. I got a Breckenridge Brewery water bottle spilling right here. There's nothing better than sitting down with an ice cold Breck brew. They've been doing it for 35 years. All comes down to their love and passion for making good beer. I want to shout out the Breck Brew Ice Deck giveaway, which is an opportunity to win 2 VIP tickets on the glass. I've actually seen where these seats are. They're sweet. Great view. You get complimentary food and drink for the March 29th game against St. Louis. All you got to do is go to breckbrew.com/ice deck. You can also find the link in our show notes. Check out Breck Brew's new West Coast style IPA Ridge Runner as well. This double dry hopped brew is inspired by the untamed beauty of Colorado's trails, creates notes of bright citrus and pine. And if you want to know where you can find the closest Breck Brew to you, all you got to do is check out the Breck Beer Locator at breckbrew.com to find a brew near you. Saturday Neon, they hooked me up here with the CSU sign in the background. It's awesome. They're a local company started by a couple of CU alums. I know, but they've been so great to me, guys. They hooked me up with this sign totally unexpectedly. I cannot thank them enough. I really love this thing. Makes my office feel just a little bit more special, and yours can too. You want to take your office, your man cave, your fan cave, your bar, maybe you're in the dorms, whatever. You want to take it to the next level, do it with a Saturday Neon sign. Check out their new Essentials collection featuring almost 50 of the biggest schools. These bad boys, they're only $75. Super easy to hang. They now have Utah signs if you're into that. Unlike the traditional neon, these LED signs won't break the bank or shatter, but still give you that classic uniform glow that you know and love. They last up to 100,000 hours, so you can enjoy them for years to come. Perfect gift for a Ram fan in your life. And if you use that code DNVR for 10% off your order at SaturdayNeon.com, you're going to get hooked up with an even better deal, which is awesome. Again, use that code DNVR for 10% off your order at SaturdayNeon.com. All right. Connor says CSU-Utah State future Pac-12 rivalry, which is a great way to segue this. I have argued that it is a rivalry that CSU should lean into. I just think that because you're not going to play Air Force anymore, it makes a lot of sense that they could be a regional team that you have an established history with. They've already played like 80 times in football. Maybe introduce a traveling trophy and lean into it. The games have been highly competitive in football going back to 2012, 2011-ish when we started playing them, even before they were in the Mountain West. And on the basketball side, it's been epic. I don't understand how Utah State has been able to sustain this run that they're on. The fact that they are seemingly in position to get another at-large bid is damn impressive, given the fact that they've had 3 coaches in 3 years. They've had turnover. I will say, I mean, the fact that they were able, the fact that Calhoun was able to hang on to Falslev and Ian Martinez, that was huge. I mean, those are the 2 lead pieces on that team. Those are really talented guys. But I mean, even going back to like the Sam Merrill stuff and 2020, him hitting that shot against San Diego State, it's still a shame that those Utah State and San Diego State teams didn't get an opportunity to play in the tournament that year, because I think both of them were second weekend type teams. They've been solid these last couple of years, and they're a lot different stylistically than, you know, what we saw last year with like Great Osabor and some of that, more spread you out. They've got a lot of shooters. But before we get into the matchup itself, obviously with this being the Fight Like a Ram game, I just want to remind everyone that this weekend is bigger than just basketball. This is probably the coolest thing that CSU does as an institution. We've got a ton of great traditions, don't get me wrong. You know, Comatose the Cannon, awesome. The Border War and the Bronze Boot Running, awesome. Ag Day, incredible. We've got a lot of great stuff going. But the Fight Like a Ram game is just so special to wear the names of cancer patients and fighters instead of their own it's just so powerful, man. It makes me emotional every single year. Obviously, we all have been impacted by cancer in one way or another. Gotten a couple of rough news, cancer news in my life of late, not with me personally, but with people I know. And this one is special, and I'm really looking forward to it. Sorry, got a little emotional there for a second. But it's just one of many things that kind of shows why college sports are so special, and how it's about representing your community, and it's always been something that has meant a lot to me, and I'm really looking forward to it. Let's get into the matchup and talk about this important game. Obviously, it's crucial if you want to have any hope of making the NCAA tournament. The most likely way to get there would be winning the Mountain West tournament, but if you're hoping for that outside chance of an at-large bid, which I think CSU maybe, if they could win out in the regular season, add another key win or 2 in Vegas, at least get to the title game. I think they could be in the mix potentially. Would probably need some help along the way. You know, you don't want to have like too much chaos, too many other bid stealers in other leagues. But you've got an opportunity. I will say, at the very least, it does feel like CSU, if they're going to be a 20+ win team, finish top, 5 in the Mountain West, they're probably at least going to be in the NIT, maybe even host. But I still am not giving up that hope of getting to the tournament for the 3rd time in 4 years, because I think this team can do it, man. They're top 3 in offensive and defensive efficiency. I think they match up just fine with everybody, really, other than New Mexico. But New Mexico's looked a little sluggish of late. They lost to 2 really good teams, so I'm not trying to be over dramatic. But I mean, they are beatable. And maybe it doesn't have to be CSU that beats them in the tournament. Maybe San Diego State or somebody else is able to take them down for you, Boise. But that's why you really want to win this game here and give yourself a strong opportunity to at least finish top 3. I talked about it a little bit yesterday, but there is a fairly realistic scenario where Boise, San Diego State, Utah State, and CSU all finish 15-5 in the league. If that were to happen, assuming that New Mexico stays the top seed, and if they keep losing, then things could get really wonky. But let's just assume UNM stays in that number 1 spot. If all 4 of those teams finish 15-5, the The one thing that could hurt CSU and Utah State is Boise and San Diego State. They both have a win over New Mexico. So they would own that tiebreaker over the Rams. If you're a CSU fan, I really think you're hoping that, San Diego State, Boise can drop one more here. CSU has an opportunity to do that themselves. They could take care of it. But we'll see. There's a chance, you could be as low as 5th, as high as 2nd, or I mean, technically 1st if New Mexico were to lose out or something like that. Highly unlikely as of now. But if you win this one, you're going to be in a really good spot to potentially finish 2nd in the league, which, considering where we were at just a couple of months ago, is pretty crazy. And I mean, even considering where this team was picked in the preseason, it's been really fun. This has been one of the teams that I have enjoyed covering the most. No, they're not quite as, I don't think the top end talent is quite there, with like the Roddy Stevens team, although this team, especially with Cayenne coming on of late, is making me put less weight behind that argument. I think they're still young and raw, but I mean, Croc and Cayenne, I think, are going to be quite good, and Neek's an NBA guy, obviously. So this team is good, but it's not the 25 win team from 2022. Even last year's team, just with the veterans that they had and how everybody gelled together, it's not quite that offensively. Defensively, I think this team is better. But it's just been cool to see these guys figure it out. Like it feels like the college basketball of old, where you've got some young guys that you really believe in. You come into the season hoping that they're able to make a leap. There were some wrinkles in the process, and it obviously took some feeling out with these guys as they ironed out the rotations. They needed Bemba to get healthy. Hopefully Bemba is able to go. And this one, not having him for this game would be a pretty big factor, I think. I mean, he only played 1 minute in that second half the other night. Hopefully that was more precautionary than anything. But they need it. Oh man, that's really cool. Jacob in the Toyota chat says, really excited for Fight Like Ram game. Keyshawn is going to ball out rocking my cousin's name. That's what it's all about, man. Thank you for sharing that. That actually, I needed to hear that. That really made my day. I'm looking forward to that. All right, let's get into this matchup specifically, because CSU in the second half in that first game against Utah State, tremendous. 55 points in the second half, I believe, is the season high for CSU in a half, but pretty tough to win when you give up 93 points, especially on the road. It's tough to win when the opposing team makes their first 7 threes of the game in the first 8 minutes. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. This one it came down to the wire technically, in the sense that the Rams did have an opportunity to get within 2 possessions late, but really, I mean, they're down 10 plus until like 90 seconds remaining. They were down by as much as 23 in that first half. Even in the second half, like, they'd kind of fight back into it. Then Utah State would extend it back to like 15, 16. Never truly felt like CSU was in a spot where they were going to take it back. But you'd love to see some of that offense you saw in the second half. I mean, really, that was the spark of what started a nice stretch that they kind of carried over into that 2-game homestand against Wyoming and Nevada. They shot the 3 ball especially well in that, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. But I think the big key for CSU in this one, and it's a little bit of it makes me a little bit nervous, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is I think they've got to jump out to a much quicker start. The slow starts have been rough now. CSU's been really good in the second halves. They've won 6 straight second halves. We talked about that yesterday. They're plus 57 over the last 6 games in the second half. But after scoring 44 in the first half against Wyoming, coming off of that 55-point second half against Utah State, CSU's been held below 35 in 3 straight now. I would really like to see a quicker start. I'm not saying you need to jump out and score 45 points again, but if you're held below 30 again, that is definitely going to have me feeling a little bit nervous at halftime, just because of what this Utah State can do to you offensively. Like Boise, I thought, did a great job the other night defensively of never really allowing Utah State to get into a rhythm. I do think, though, that this team is is one you're going to have to outscore to an extent. Like, obviously, you're going to have to be much better defensively than you were in that first matchup. If you're giving up 85 plus, probably not going to win. It's just hard to score at that pace in a 40-minute college basketball game. I guess if it goes to overtime or something, that's a different scenario, but you can't keep counting on being able to pull yourself out of the holes. Now, it's not like it's been a huge issue. Like, even though they've been kind of ugly offensively, defensively, they've been solid enough the last couple games against Air Force, against UNLV, for it to not totally bite you in the butt. But I think getting off to a quicker start is going to be huge. Not giving up 7 threes in the first 8 minutes is going to be big. But I also want to see CSU shoot the ball better in this game. Again, like, you ended up hitting, 13 threes in that matchup against Utah State, which was more than Utah State, who kind of cooled off as the game went on. But they went like 25 of 45 from deep between the Wyoming and the Nevada games. They have not shot the ball quite as well. A little bit better in that second half against Air Force. They finished 8 of 20, I believe, which isn't bad. But this feels like a game where you're going to need Kyan Evans to hit a couple from deep, Jalen Lake to knock down a couple. If he could build off of what he showed against Air Force, that would be great. Obviously, Niko has got to do his thing. I mean, you can't really ask much more from Niko in that first game. 24 points, 16 rebounds in 40 minutes. Like, that dude's been such a workhorse all year long. I think the rotation, though, is going to be a big factor as well. Like, you kind of anticipate at this point that at home, you should be able to get fairly consistent offensive production out of your stars. Niko should do his thing. Hopefully Jalen Lake can, keep it up. Kyan has been incredibly consistent at this point. He's been insanely good in the second half. But you need more from the role players than what you got in that last game. I'm sitting here looking at some of these numbers, and 1 of 5 from Bowen Bourne. Kashan only 1 of 2. Morton 1 of 2, 2 of 3 from Jorgensen. They kept calling him Jurgensen the other night on the broadcast. I'm not trying to throw shade because I'm awful at names, but we are far enough into the season where we shouldn't be getting Nick Cliffords and Kyle Jurgensens. Made me laugh every time he said it, though. But the role players tend to be better at home. That's just pretty common in college basketball. It's certainly been the case for this group. You're going to need, Bowen to come in and knock down a couple of shots, or Keyshawn to be able to provide a spark, assuming that it's not one of those games where, like, Niko just goes for 30 or Kyan goes off for 25 on top of it, which is possible. I mean, with the way those guys are shooting the ball of late, it's certainly possible. But I would like to see the depth guys contribute a whole lot more than they did in that first matchup in Logan. I think if CSU plays to their capability at home, this should be a matchup you expect to win. I'm expecting the atmosphere to be pretty solid. It's a big time game. A lot is at stake, but also with it being a Saturday afternoon, and it is supposed to be really nice. So, I mean, maybe you lose a couple of students that decide they'd rather go out to Horsetooth instead. But I actually really like the time. I think it's easier to draw the students for a Saturday afternoon game than a Saturday night game. So the crowd should be in your favor. You got the Fight Like a Ram event on top of that. So, like, it's going to feel real. What's the word? Like, it's just going to feel special in Moby. It's going to feel like one of those big time home games. But they've just got to be able to take care of business in this one if they want to have any hope of staying in the top 3. And based on how you've performed to this point, I think it would be a bummer if the Rams fell out of the top 3, because they've really handled their business since Christmas. It's a shame they didn't play a little better earlier in the year. We talked about the woulda, coulda, shoulda. UC Riverside, Washington CU, we could go on and on. I would have liked to have seen them play a little bit better against New Mexico in either of those matchups, but for the most part, they have handled their business in the games you should expect them to win, which are their home games, in league play. And they punched up a couple times, San Diego State, Utah State, not even punched up. They've been able to, take down a quality opponent at times. And then when it's been the lower teams, they've really handled things. 5 sweeps at this point. They have handled their business better against the bottom half of the league than anybody in the conference. And I think it's that consistency that really gives me some confidence with this group kind of going into the Mountain West tournament here. And winning out is going to be a tough proposition. Boise is not a team that loses very often in their home building. That said, CSU has pulled them off a couple of times under Medved, one there in 2019, one there in 2022 as well on Super Bowl Sunday. But at this point, you just kind of got to take it one game at a time. I think if you win these next two home games, I feel pretty good about CSU finishing top 3. Again, the tiebreakers could get a little bit wonky. You would just really like to be able to be on the opposite side of the bracket as the 1 seed, if possible, just to give yourself the best possible chance on paper to make a run in the conference tournament. But I like where they're at. And I think, you feel pretty good going into these last 2 home games. And if you win those, it sets you up for a massive road game against Boise State. We're going to do a Mountain West power ranking here, talk about some games around the league. But we do have a question in the Toyota chat that I'll get to from Scott. Since football did their off-season basketball tourney, who do you think could be a dual sport athlete? That's a good question. On the basketball side, I could see he's a little skinny, but maybe Neat Clifford could be a tight end. Somebody that you just throw the ball up to and let him catch it. On the football side, I know AJ Noland was a pretty solid basketball player. The football team as a whole, they recruit a lot of multi-sport athletes out of high school. So I think, a lot of these guys could be the answer. If CSU had baseball, Owen Long was a really good baseball player. A lot of these guys play basketball. A lot of them ran track. So, I think the majority of them could be somewhat of a 2-sport athlete. I don't know if they're good enough to be D1 hoopers, but athletically, they could certainly be in that mix. But AJ Noland is somebody that really comes to mind for me. If we're going off last year's roster, like Torrey Horton, I know can throw down some pretty nasty dunks when he's healthy. But it's just the skill level. Like the athleticism is there. These guys are good enough to throw down the dunks and all that. It's the skill gap when it comes to ball handling and stuff like that that really separates people and kind of dictates if you could play both of those sports at that level. But it would be cool to see that happen someday, see somebody play for both CSU basketball and CSU football. I don't know how realistic it is. I think both sides would be hesitant to allow the other to do that. It's so all-consuming being a D1 sport in anything, and you've got to be so locked in that to be able to do that in 2 sports is really, really challenging, especially ones that have as many games as football and basketball do. And then obviously, like, how do you deal with that in November when they overlap? Like, there's a whole lot of factors that could come into play there. Maybe Bemba could play football. He's from Austria, so I don't think he would have played a whole lot of football growing up. It would be totally foreign to him. But he's a guy, maybe you could like convert him into an offensive tackle or a guard or something like that. Maybe not quite big enough maybe not quite tall enough or arms long enough to be a tackle. Neek would be the guy I would go with, though. I just think that athleticism would translate at tight end, and I know that's a bit of a cop-out because it's the easy stereotype pick with the dual sport athletes. Oh, the basketball player, convert them to tight end. But we've seen it work, We've Antonio Gates, Tony Gonzalez, etc. If you're a 6'5" plus and you can jump through the roof, you're going to have a pretty opportunity to catch those 50-50 balls. You'd have to put on some weight, but I would certainly sign up to watch it happen. If you got any more questions or comments, keep them firing in the Toyota chat. We can get to as many as we can before we get out of here. I really appreciate how active it has been this morning. Much love to all you guys. Again, if you wouldn't mind giving us a thumbs up. If you're listening later on Spotify, Apple, etc., if you wouldn't mind giving us a comment, a 5-star review sure would be nice as well. But again, I just appreciate everybody rocking with us and supporting our content. Let's get into the latest Mountain West basketball power ranking. Not a lot of movement these last couple of weeks, so we can kind of breeze through it, and then we can get to some more questions and comments from you guys. I've got a couple of thoughts on some Mountain West prospects in the NFL Combine if we have time, and then we'll get on out of here. At the bottom, we got Fresno State. They are currently on a 10-game losing streak. Air Force was able to snap their losing streak by beating them the other night before falling to CSU. There was a stretch about a month and a half ago, maybe more like a month ago, where it felt like Fresno, even though they were losing, they were hanging around. They felt kind of closer to San Jose State, where it was like any given night they could be a problem for somebody. And you still can't overlook anybody like in a conference tournament scenario. But they look like a team that knows their coach is getting fired, that knows a lot of them won't be in Fresno next year. And I think they're making their summer plans at this point. Air Force, they're struggling, but they still fight hard. Ethan Taylor is good enough to give anybody a scare. So I actually have Air Force jumping Fresno State in the power rankings for the first time in a while. At 9, we've got Wyoming. I think they're the best of the worst 3 teams. That's how I would phrase it. Agbim is good enough to give anybody a scare, kind of like Ethan Taylor. The depth just isn't quite there. San Jose State, UNLV, kind of that next tier of teams, especially UNLV without Deaton Thomas. San Jose State battling some injuries, but I still think they could potentially be a team that thwarts somebody's plans here down the stretch, hopefully not CSU's. I've got UNLV at 7, Nevada at 6. They play this weekend, so maybe that'll dictate who is in what spot next week, but it just kind of depends on any given night with those groups. The inconsistency is maddening. I don't see Nevada moving on from Alford, but I do think this will be the last year we see Kruger in Vegas. He's a do less with more type coach. They've had great athletes, they've signed some guys, and they don't do anything with it. The top 4 is getting a little hard just based on the recent results, but I'm going to stick to my gut. I have Boise at 4th at the moment. They jumped San Diego State at 5, but Boise might be playing the best basketball the last 2 weeks. This power ranking is kind of all encompassing throughout the league slate. So it's not just what have you done recently. It's kind of a combination of your work in totality as well as how you look of late. But Boise looks dangerous. They're on a 3-game win streak. I'm keeping CSU at 3. They've won 4 straight. They've done what they should do. But 2 of these next 3 are really going to dictate, where they finish in this conversation. Utah State 2, UNM 1, although New Mexico has now lost 2 straight. So we'll see if they're able to finish the season strong. They've got a pretty favorable last couple of games, so it shouldn't be a big issue for them. Like they play at home against Air Force on Saturday. That's a 2 p.m. tip. Boise at Fresno, really not the most exciting weekend slate. We've got Nevada, UNLV tonight. That's a 9 p.m. game. Air Force, New Mexico, obviously. CSU-Utah State, the biggest game of the weekend. Boise at Fresno. San Diego State at Wyoming could potentially be wonky. Wyoming at home has been a little bit of a thorn in the side for some of these teams. San Diego State historically has not been great in Laramie. I could also see a Wyoming team that's kind of looking forward to the end of the year get thumped by a really physical San Diego State team. It just kind of depends on what type of intensity the Aztecs come out with, because Wyoming, especially with the way they play offensively, they're so slow paced. They just want to wind the shot clock down and hope they can get a good shot off late. That's hard to do against a team like San Diego State, who's so great at on-ball defense, that has multiple shot contesters. If your game plan is to just drill big time jumpers all game, late in the possession against them, it's not going to be a recipe for success very often. I guess that's all I'm saying. But that said, though, San Diego State has been one of those weird teams that has played to their level of their competition at times. Like, they should have lost to San Jose State. They should have lost to Air Force. And then they'll step up and dominate, a top team. Like I've said all year, as up and down and as unimpressive as they have been at times, it kind of feels like Boise State football, not this past year, but the year before, where it's like, man, they were remarkably average. And then you look up at the end of the year and they still win the conference. Or, the Kansas City Chiefs haven't been as good as they have been the last couple of years. They're better defensively, so they're not the best comp. But last year or the year before, you're looking at Mahomes, this is a very average year. The offense is still win the division easily, still win the Super Bowl. And it's like, if we couldn't get them when they were meh. How are we going to get them when they get it rolling again? It would not surprise me at all if, after as average as San Diego State has looked, they get hot for 3 games in Vegas and they win the conference tournament, because the history says it can happen. We've seen it happen more than once. Not what I'm rooting for, obviously, but it could happen. It would not surprise me. Again, I do think it would help CSU if we saw Boise drop a game, hopefully to CSU. And if San Diego State could drop one of these as well, maybe Wyoming can do the Rams a favor and, take down the Aztecs, which would really hurt their at-large candidacy at that point. I don't know if they're an NCAA tournament team, and that would not be great for the league, but it would be better for CSU, at least in their chances of finishing top 3 here and, ultimately potentially playing their way into the NCAA tournament. All right. Before we get out of here, if you got any more questions, comments, throw them my way. Tory Horton, there's some clips of him going around speaking with the media out at the Combine. I tweeted this the other day. I have not talked about it on the show, but based on everything I have heard, he is not expected to compete physically at the Combine. He's just going to do the interview process. He's a guy that's going to really impress NFL GMs. He's just really humble. He's an articulate person as well. He's somebody that when you would ask him questions, he would really work hard to give you a good answer, and that was something I always appreciated about him. One of the hardest workers I've ever been around, a special teams grinder. Returned to punt for a touchdown 3 straight years at CSU. He wasn't afraid to go over the middle, wasn't afraid to get hit, wasn't afraid to put his body on the line. Really unfortunate that the knee injury cut his season short. I just feel like he deserved to go out as, statistically speaking, one of the greatest, or the greatest, Mountain West receiver of all time. Didn't end up playing out that way, but I think somebody's going to get a gem in Tory Horton. He's only 22 years old. He's got plenty of time to recover from the knee issue. He was going to run a 4.38 had he been healthy. Like, he's one of the fastest guys in college football when healthy. And I just think he's a do-it-all type receiver. I think he's a day one impact guy if he's healthy. I really like the receivers as a whole coming out this year. Jalen Royals out of Utah State, I think can really translate. I'm a big Ricky White guy for a lot of the same reasons. I'm a fan of Tory Horton. I think Tory's a better athlete, a better receiver. But I love that Ricky White is willing to go block punts as the number 1 wide receiver on a double-digit top 25 team. I just love that mentality. I'm interested to see where Gianti falls. Does he go top 15? I don't think there's 10 players in this NFL draft class that are better than him, especially right now. Would love if he ended up with the Broncos. I know first-round running back pick, controversial to some. I also think you look the last couple of years, it's worked out for some of these teams that have invested in the position, either through free agency with the Eagles and Saquon Barkley, or, in the draft. I mean, look at what Jahmyr Gibbs does for that Detroit offense, and running back, tight ends, certainly areas where the Broncos have been lacking juice these last couple of years. So, maybe a Mountain West option could be on the table for a team like Denver. I always enjoy when I get to see the Mountain West guys, play for my team. Finally, CSU women's basketball looking to complete the season sweep of Wyoming, which would be huge. Basically cement your spot as the 2 team, in the Mountain West tournament. Hopefully you're able to get UNLV back, played fairly competitively in both matchups, but it's just been, they've just kind of been that team that CSU hasn't been able to get through these last couple of years. Could ultimately determine the Mountain West Women's Player of the Year award. I think there's a good chance Fertig gets it. I mean, she's leading the league in points per game, field goal percentage, and rebounds. Pretty solid stats. But I mean, Ronsick has been awesome as well. 18.5 points per game, 6.4 boards. I at times wish they would prioritize touches for her more, the way Wyoming does through Fertig. Although at times Wyoming is so one-dimensional that it can be a detriment to them as well. I understand that argument. I just think that Emma Ronsick is about as special as any college basketball player you're going to see come through a league like the Mountain West, especially in the NIL era, where she very easily could have gotten a bag to stay at Creighton, or, I've heard she got a pretty significant offer to join South Carolina. So I would just love to see her go out on top. I would love to see the women's team find a way to win in Vegas as well. Cash their way into the NCAA tournament, because I think Ronzik and this team are good enough to make a little bit of noise if they get a favorable matchup. It's been a while since we've seen them be able to do so. Kind of feels like they're due. I've said the same thing about the men's team under Medved. It'd be a little bit funny for this group to win after having Isaiah Stevens and Roddy all those years and not pull it out. But they've been knocking on the door. They've been making it to the semis. I think they've got a good chance for at least one of, if not both of these teams to win the tournament. But big week and a half coming up here. A lot still in play for both these teams. Shout out to everybody in Ram Nation for rocking with us. It's been a really fun show. We'll have more content throughout the weekend. Much love, y'all. We are always proud to be. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.